Session 4A, GST. If you want superannuation, it's the other room. This is recent GST issues affecting the financial services industry. So I'll introduce Michael and then we'll have some time for questions at the end. So Michael Perez, FTIA, Fellow of the Tax Institute, is a leading expert in tax at Allens Arthur Robinson in Melbourne. His knowledge of income tax, stamp duty and GST and experience in these areas makes him a sought-after tax advisor. Michael has advised a number of large corporates on a range of commercial matters, including reorganisations, demergers, financial arrangements and M&A. In the area of GST, Michael has appeared before the Federal Court. If you could join me in welcoming him. Thank you.
Hello, and thanks for attending my session. I guess before I start, I thought I'd share with you some observations that I've made in relation to the GST area, which are generalisations, but I think there's some common themes that's starting to develop. The first thing is, over the last 12 years, we've seen a fairly large body of case law being developed in the GST area by the courts, and in particular, there is some appetite for the High Court to hear some GST cases. The High Court has handed down judgments in Reliance Carpet, in Travelex, which I'll discuss today, and also gave the Commissioner special leave to appeal the Qantas decision last week. So there is an appetite there for the High Court to hear these cases. And my sense is that going forward, the High Court's appetite might actually continue, because with GST, it affects areas which have, in some respects, broader application than just the four corners of the GST Act. And it's a bit like stamp duty, where it does look at concepts of property, does look at concepts of consideration, which, as I say, can have wider implications and consideration. So my sense is that we might have a few more cases that the High Court will be willing to consider. The second theme is this, that in looking at the cases where the issues affect what I call the core provisions of the GST Act, which are concepts of supply and consideration, there's no dispute as to what those concepts mean in the GST Act. Supply is defined extremely broadly, consideration is defined extremely broadly, and acquisition is defined extremely broadly. So in looking at some of the cases which have involved questions of supply or consideration, there hasn't been a lot of debate about what those terms mean in the context of the GST Act, but the cases have turned largely on the facts, and in particular have focused and turned on the legal relationships between the parties to the transaction. And let me give you, as an example, Qantas, which, as I mentioned, will be heard by the High Court. Qantas, the fact pattern was very simple. Qantas takes bookings from customers to fly them from point A to point B, and on occasions customers don't rock up or cancel their flight, and under the terms and conditions Qantas gets to keep the money. And the question is whether the money that Qantas has kept is subject to GST. It involves question of what supply Qantas has made to the customer. It involves question of consideration, but in that case the technical definition of those concepts in the GST Act was all but agreed. There was no issue about that. The sole question was one of identifying what supply, if any, Qantas made. Qantas's argument was that it received the money in order to provide the supply in the future of a flight. And because that flight never eventuated, because the passenger never turned up, or alternatively the flight was cancelled, there was no supply, and without a supply you can't be taxed. The Commissioner's view was that what the customer paid for was in fact a reservation, and that was a supply by Qantas to the customer when he accepted that reservation, and because money was paid and kept by Qantas, that constituted consideration for that supply. The full Federal Court agreed with Qantas, and as I said, the matter's before the High Court. But it's an example of where the central core concepts are not at issue in terms of their construction. It's really a question of the facts, and in that case, and there are others in this area, it all turned on the legal contracts between the parties. The other observation I would make related to this one is that in the area of specialist rules, and the financial supply rules is one area, the residential accommodation rules is another, the position starts to get a little bit more complicated, where and you will see with the Amex